Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Randolph Carter and the Necrophagic Shadows of Verdunn by Egilsaga. There was another barrage that night. The Germans didn't play around when it came to artillery. The sound of guns firing was a continuous hum, and their muzzle flashes illuminated the horizon like the glow of a distant dawn. The French responded in kind, and shells came screaming down on both sides. Soldiers huddled in their holes, swaddled in filthy overcoats and lice-ridden blankets, and prayed to God Almighty that whoever was hit tonight, it would not be them or anybody they knew, at least nobody who owed them money. Standing watch behind a wall of sandbags, Corporal Carter felt uncomfortably exposed. Every now and again, a shell would land nearby, and he ducked down as dirt and shrapnel battered the sandbags. The 105s were less accurate than the French guns, but once in a while they hit what they were aiming at. If that happened, the sandbags wouldn't be much help. The bomb-proof dugout behind him would become a tomb for the dozen or so men within. He couldn't even smoke. The light from a cigarette would serve as a bullseye for the snipers dotted across no man's land. Peering into the darkness was like having a bag over your head. He may as well have been blind. He could barely even see the machine gun leaning against the barricade. The barrel would poke through a firing slit no wider than his finger. In these conditions, he'd have preferred a pistol. His belt knife would have to do. Of course, if a German patrol snuck up on him, not even the men snoring in the nearby foxholes could help him. In the pitch blackness, it was only natural for his mind to start to wander. Without any visual information to process, the mind starts playing tricks on you, showing you things that aren't really there. Vague reddish shapes drifted through the horizon, were few and far between, and the dull thudding of distant guns were beginning to die down. Perhaps the barrage was over, or maybe they were just taking a break, waiting for soldiers to crawl out of their holes just to be slaughtered in the next wave of shells. He pushed up his sleeve and checked his watch. The radium-illuminated dial showed a time just past midnight. Only a couple of more hours, and he'd be relieved, if he was lucky. The rest of his watch would be uneventful, wishfully thinking, of course, even as he thought that. He could hear the telltale whine of incoming shells. Most of them were quiet, and he could tell they weren't aimed anywhere near him. One scream was louder than the rest, and Carter, with reflexes honed over 2 years in the trenches, dove for the nearest cover. He folded his body up like an accordion in a shell burst, and clumps of dirt and sharp bits of stone pummeled his overcoat. Something hit his helmet and made his ears ring. A shard of shrapnel slammed into the dirt near his hand, and a stray rock left a nasty gash across his cheek. Before the war, he'd have considered that a nasty cut. Now he didn't even bother wiping away the blood. As the echo of the explosion died away, he slowly unfurled himself and took stock of himself. All 4 limbs were still present. His overcoat was torn, but it was falling apart anyway. Maybe this new damage would be enough to wrangle a new one from the quartermaster sergeant. His watch was still intact, which was good, since the damn thing cost him nearly a week's wage. Just as he was about to sigh in relief, there was a faint clicking sound nearby, which his well-trained ears identified as a hobnail boot striking stone. Sandbags were scattered all over. Some burst, and he found himself crawling through the wet, mulchy filth as he fumbled around for the machine gun. He cut his hand on something sharp and cursed in French, as was his habit after so long in the Legion. It was only when he closely inspected the thing that he realized it was the twisted remnant of the machine gun, utterly destroyed by the shell's blast. For a moment he understood just how incredibly lucky he had been to escape with nothing but bruises. But he heard the sound again, closer now, and drew the knife from his belt. 6 inches of steel stood between him and whatever was out there. "Allez!" he hissed. "Monte pas!" The stench of decay filled his nostrils, a common odor in the trenches, where the dead might lie unburied for weeks before a truce could be arranged to collect them. This smell was somehow worse than that, as if an army of deceased had climbed the hillside to assail his tiny position atop the ridge. He had to fight to keep from gagging, but the strange impression refused to leave. What manner of man or beast stood before him in the darkness? As it moved closer, it became harder to reconcile the noises and smells with that of any creature he knew. It sounded wet and sloppy as it moved across the disturbed earth, breathing raspy and pausing every now and then to sniff the air. He could almost make out the shape as it clambered over the fallen barricade, moving slowly on all fours. It was too big to be a wolf, but too small to be a lion, which they didn't have in France anyway. Or did they? A shiver ran down Carter's spine as he clutched the knife even tighter, his knuckles turning white. He glanced in the direction of the dugout, where his comrades lay sleeping. If he could just alert them, he might have a chance. He opened his mouth to shout, but before he could, the beast lunged at him, pushing him flat on his back. His shout turned into a scream of pain and fear as claws dug into his chest, turning his uniform to rags. His body moved on instinct alone, slashing with one hand while trying to push the thing away with the other. Blood splashed his face as he rammed the knife home again and again. The beast didn't stop clawing, didn't even grunt as he stabbed it, though every thrust opened another spout of blood. It faltered slightly with every thrust, slowing at mortal wound piled upon mortal wound. Just when Carter thought the beast was beginning to falter, something grunted behind him. Another one of his friends? It shouted. Though he could not make out the words, he recognized the language as French. There was a sudden crack, and the beast fell limp atop Carter. The legionnaire pushed it off easily. Now dead, it weighed no more than a heavy rucksack. What seemed like strength was really nothing more than animalistic ferocity. Someone grabbed him and pulled him away, dragging the wounded man into a sitting position. A light shone in his face, blinding him. Blinking hard, he recognized the face of Lieutenant Seeger, the only other American in the company. "You all right, Carter? Those scratches look deep. Mitrox, Albrecht, bring a stretcher quickly." Carter tried to focus on his friend's voice, but his ears wouldn't stop ringing. He shook his head, and white-hot pain shot up from his shoulder where the thing had clawed him. He glanced down at it, but only for a second. At the sight of bone and joint gristle was enough to make him spill his dinner down the front of his shirt. If the sight of his own mutilation was disturbing, however, what he saw lying on the ground, mere feet from where he now sat, was enough to drive any sane man mad. Luckily for Randolph Carter, no sane man would have joined the Foreign Legion to begin with. It had been a man once. That much was obvious. Judging by the cut of the boots, it might have been a German. Perhaps he deserted or got lost on patrol, or simply went mad from the immeasurable strain of war. He'd been in no man's land for some time, long enough for his clothes to rot and his very skin to fester. The necrophagic fiend was covered in gaping, open sores, seeping milky fluid. It was a wonder he hadn't already perished from the massive infection spreading across his body. His jagged fingernails were like claws, where he had fingernails, and the flesh wasn't worn away to reveal bone. The thing's face was gaunt and hairy, with a long beard and two deep-set, beady eyes that no longer showed any sign of human intelligence. Even with multiple stab wounds and a gunshot to the belly, the thing's chest still gently rose and fell. It was still breathing when Carter was loaded onto a stretcher, and only as he was being hauled off did he hear the gunshot which finally put the man, beast, whatever it was, to rest. The field was near Douaumont, where a veritable feast. A man could live out there for months, Sigurd explained on the way to the aid station, assuming he wasn't a picky eater. He'd probably been watching Carter all night, and when the shell hit, he assumed he was dead and closed in for an easy meal. It was a neat and tidy explanation, and it wrapped things up quite nicely. Carter appreciated that. But when he heard about poor Sigurd's death in the trenches of the Somme, and the strange bite marks found on his friend's body, he couldn't help but wonder. His butchered shoulder was enough to get him a medical discharge. Within a month, Carter was back in America, placed under convalescent care of the famous doctors of Arkham Sanitarium. Friends came to visit. Warren, Pickman, even the reclusive Providence writer paid him a quick stop during a tour of New England. The time came when he was to be released. Though his body healed, something was still wrong with him. Strange impressions, jumping at loud noises, and everywhere he was followed by the necrophagic shadows of Verdunn. So quoth this raven. This was written by Egilsaga for Lovecraft's birthday, which I am late for, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway, my darlings. And thank you so much for coming to visit. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Charlotte Emerson, Ermin Kate, Darren and Jennifer, and Laura. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.